Okay, thank you for joining us today. My name is Greg Neal, and with me is Jeff Cry, and we're talking about how to avoid employee burnout, and specifically mastering that tool for delegation, which is another way of saying building leadership around you. So thank you for joining us today, and we'll just get started. Let me start with some logistics. You'll notice on your control panel, there's an opportunity to hit the chat button. In case you have a question, just hit that and type it in your question. And then that will be a major contribution. We welcome any questions throughout the presentation. This is going to be a discussion between Jeff and I, and hitting some of the challenges and best practices is a good way to summarize this. Okay, so here we go. To get us started here, what we really are talking about today is the experience of running a business is, from my point of view, from the things that I hear, are all too often really, really stressful. And today's presentation is about how it doesn't have to be that way. We're going to offer some solutions, some best practices for how to alleviate some of the breakdowns and stresses that owners feel in running a business. Another thing I hear is the original intention of having a great deal of freedom, having an adventure, having that experience of challenge, and the fulfillment of that ends up being something that you feel almost imprisoned by, like a slave to your business. Like, the thrill is gone. Well, okay. Here's the thing. You're in luck. There's hope. There are solutions. And the evidence for that is businesses grow. Some people plateau at 1 million. Some people plateau at 2 million, 3 million. So what we want to offer today are solutions for having a healthy, growing business. And the thing is, health is the growth is good. Moderate growth is healthy and good. It's good for your employees. It's a good safeguard for a uncertain economic culture around us. So growth is good. It's a significant indicator of the health of the business. So let's jump into some conversation.
Well, I'd like to make a comment. How I got involved when Greg and I started talking about this issue and what it does to value, it's shocking because there are challenges that come along with growth, obviously, when the business is entirely dependent on one person. And that comes down to delegation and how you duplicate your efforts. So when it comes to the challenges of growth and delegation and the mistakes that people make and how do you let people fail if you let them fail, all three of those questions can sort of be thrown in a pot and stirred around. But let's talk about the challenges of delegation and that communication. And Greg, you've been out in the field for years talking to restoration owners. What have you found is the biggest struggle? What's the biggest challenge these guys face?
Well, Jeff, that's a really big question. One way I can answer that is owners often start their businesses, and in the early years, their businesses is you could say owner-centric. They're in the beginning formulative years, they're doing everything themselves, and so then as they grow, if they're successful, they grow and they begin to add employees. And one of the biggest challenges they have is how to set up and delegate and build leadership underneath them. and still continue to add 5, 10, 50, 100 employees. What is it that how to give away the responsibilities in a way that people actually feel the ownership and really think, like an owner. That's one of the things that is probably the biggest challenge. So
well, when it comes to delegation, there's sort of some right ways and wrong ways to do that. And many times business owners think it's just sort of offloading or dumping their thoughts on somebody, saying, here's what I need you to do. What are the pros and cons with that, Greg? I guess let's start with the cons. What's the negatives of having that style of attitude towards delegation?
Well, I think one of the first misunderstandings, the first mistakes, is a misunderstanding about what do employees really want. And so owners, in their misunderstanding about what employees really want, sometimes think that they have to pay more money to really motivate people, and that's not the case. What really good employees really want is a great work environment. They actually want the freedom and the responsibility to do their job, and they want the freedom to feel like they're making a difference. And so if we really look at the things that employees say that they want, what's really important to them, it's a win-win, actually. And I see almost every day, every week, how owners struggle to understand that and set up an environment that delivers that to employees. Money is way down the list. In fact, what I see is pay people enough money so that the issue of money is not what they're thinking about all the time. That's obviously not what you want them to think about. What you want them thinking about is their job. So that's one of the misunderstandings.
Yeah, very true. How people get treated on their job is typically 80 to 90% of it. Everything else is a detail many, many times. Well, let's talk about failure for a second. When you talk about employees failing or business owners allowing their employees to fail, to learn, how do you avoid that, Greg, in your experience as a business consultant in setting up these sorts of systems and holding teams accountable? Give us an idea or two, just some nuggets of how you allow people to fail successfully and then how to correct it.
Jeff, that's a really good question, and that's a tough one, because you've got a situation where an owner has poured his life into the business, right? It's personal, and whether it's been 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, we're talking about a situation where they feel a great deal of commitment to the business working. And you're inviting people, an owner is inviting people to come in and participate. And this is a very interesting phenomenon. It takes a very big and very generous person to allow people to fail. And again, it must be very difficult for owners emotionally to allow people to fail. But they see that's the way they learn. So unless you can understand that what builds leadership is allowing the key, let's call it, say key employees to make mistakes so that they can gather the wisdom that basically is the same mistakes and wisdom that made the owner as successful as he is, right? So that's a tricky one. But the thing that I say to owners is there's one thing that you have an abundance of that you need to develop the leadership around you. And they always look a little surprised that there's something that they have that might be of value that they have an abundance of. And what it is challenges, problems to solve. Well, they're hit with problems and challenges like daily, all day long. Okay, so the trick here is to get out of the way, to stop solving those problems, because here's where it breaks down. Owners jump in, they get like very concerned about those things. They jump in, they solve those problems, and then they give their employees the solutions. The doing of which doesn't allow their employees to feel the impact of their own actions. So what owners have to do is they have to get out of the way.
Well, and that's so true. This touches on a point that we covered last month when it comes to value of a business and effective delegation and the strength of a management team, or at least the strength of a team that involves an owner and 2 or 3 key employees, like a project manager and an estimator and maybe a lead office administrator who's chasing down money. It's without being able to replicate some of the owner's efforts and mindset, the business typically tops out. The owner can only wear so many hats, and they should be wearing 3 or 4, maybe 5 hats, and instead they typically wear 12 to 15, and they do it all. And because of that, they typically top out in value, depending on their mix of mitigation and restoration. They can top out in value from $1.5 million to $1.9 million. Very rarely will a restoration owner exceed $2 million in sales if they can't successfully learn how to delegate. And when they don't learn it, Greg, you and I have both heard it. They say comments like, good help is so hard to find. Nobody cares like I do. Nobody's willing to put in the time. And all of those are a symptom of not being able to replicate yourself and delegate effectively. Very rarely is that actually lack of good help. And if you can learn the 2 or 3 effective steps to delegation, I guarantee that your company, if the work is there, you will be able to grow. And I think one of the best side effects of effective delegation is actually learning how to have a work-life balance. And you can go down to 40 or 50 hours a week, not 60, 70, or 80. And that's good for everybody.
Exactly, Jeff. You bring up so many good points. One is, and it's never too soon to start building leadership underneath you. If you have just a handful of employees, then you can start with making 1 or 2 your key people. You can start anytime, no matter what level you're at. It's never too soon, because the sooner you start to get out of the way and let them start dealing with problems, their own problems, the sooner that actually their productivity will go up, their job satisfaction goes up, and it makes it so much easier for you to run the business. So the thing, but you also brought up a point about building a management team. When you get to the point where you're really ready to have a management team in place, okay, that's where this starts to get really important, because in order for you to really feel confident in that management team, they have to go through, I would say, 2 to 3 years of annual cycles of solving problems all year long. And you want to watch them so you can feel that you trust them. So that means, that you have been completely out of the way. You're delegating. It's a trial period of their leadership, and they have proven themselves through 2 or 3 years of a complete yearly cycle to see if they can handle everything that comes at you in the course of a year, the various seasons, all the different ups and downs. It takes that long for a team to really gel and come together. So let's say, for example, that somebody, the point you just brought up, wants to begin to step away from the business at some point. Okay, it's gonna take, I'm gonna say, 2 to 3 years to build that team so that the owner's participation in the business isn't integral for day-to-day operations, which increases the value of the business. So that's very important.
Yes. Let me ask a question. 2 to 3 years to those listening, probably sounds like an eternity, and that's an ideal situation. And it does take time for change. On the next slide, Greg, I think you mentioned practices and systems. For those people who are listening, how do I start? How do I start this process? If I reflect on my management style and I say, you know what, I've got 4 or 5 key employees and another 10 or 15 under them, and maybe I haven't done as good as I could have with delegation. Maybe I haven't been as clear. How do I start? What would I do to take a sort of get both feet on the right path moving forward?
That's a good question. So where I would start is by distinguishing one person's accountability by not assigning it to them, but asking the question. Let's say he's an estimator, you know, and so his accountability, if you ask him, he'll say, and I've done this hundreds of times, what an estimator will say is, I'm accountable for, he'll probably say, I'm accountable for definitely selling, obviously estimating. If he's stopping at that point, then he won't say anything about producing unless he's a write and run guy. And a lot of estimators will say, I'm accountable for developing adjuster relationships. So those 3 things are the 3 major concerns that are hitting him that he'll say. And the value of you asking the question is you want to get their buy-in. You want their discretionary effort. You don't want to tell them. Nobody likes being told what to do. So you ask the questions. And I've never, gone through this process hundreds of times. I've never had anybody be asked and not respond, not step up to the plate. They always do. So that's the first step.
Okay, that's excellent. When it comes to replicating those efforts, if you successfully can communicate with a team member, and let's call it your right-hand man, a project manager, an estimator, somebody that you rely on, it might even be a GM if you're large enough to have a GM. How does the culture need to change, or how do you start to take that success with one story? Let's say we've created an individual success story with one person, and the owner's feeling pretty good about that relationship. How do you start to duplicate that? Is it one at a time, or can you start to change the culture of the company in team meetings and the typically weekly team meetings that owners have?
Oh, that's a good question. You can do the whole team at once. You can set this up with, it depends on the size of the business. You could do your estimators as a group. You could do your project managers as a group. You can do your office staff and coordinators as a group. But then once, and I think another facet of your question is, once you have the accountability set up, then you really want to design, okay, how do they measure the successful implementation of each of those accountabilities? How do they measure their own success? All right, so that piece of work then rolls into a report. Give them a weekly meeting, an opportunity to come together as a team and report. So that meeting is their meeting. Now, here's where it breaks down. Owners think it's their meeting, and their presence in the meeting, owners misunderstand how influential they are to their employees. And sometimes, in order for these employees to actually step up and feel the weight of their accountability and have the opportunity to really, grow into that, you got to get owners out of the meetings and just let the employees feel the weight of the whole thing. And you know what? I've never seen them not step up to the plate. They actually love that. It's counterintuitive for many owners.
Well, it's perfect. It's perfect, Greg, because once they feel some of that ownership responsibility, and I'll use that term loosely, that they do step up and they do feel accountable, that they're there for a reason, not just to take orders and go out and check the box and what they're supposed to do. So I know the best team meetings that I've sat in on is that the owner is really the facilitator of that meeting and the facilitator of open, honest communication lines where it's about the productivity of the team in the office, not about somebody telling a department or an individual what they should or shouldn't be doing. It's the facilitation, getting 8, 10, 12 people focused on a goal and optimizing the performance of that team to get there. So I like your answer on how it can happen as a whole company, because a lot of owners out there are thinking that they need to change. They just don't know where to start. But it is fantastic to have one success story to build on and sort of practice, because as you learn how to delegate, you could listen to a seminar like this, you could read a couple of books, but you're not going to learn until you actually go through it. You know, the learning is in the doing and getting feedback and correcting where you think you went wrong, and then ultimately being the best at it that you can be.
You know, yeah, Jeff, it's really as simple as I may make it sound. It's not easy. It's challenging because you're dealing with human beings. They're not used to having so much freedom and accountability. Sometimes they learn to actually grow into it. But many employees are institutionalized. They've been told what to do for so long, they just don't know what to do with this newfound freedom.
Yeah. So, Greg, and those who are listening, I'll ask for some participation. Who has a success story? You know, who has had one of those aha moments where you sat in a meeting and you, or maybe it was a one-on-one meeting with an employee, maybe it was a company meeting where the light bulb went off and you just knew that you had discovered the power of effective delegation. You know, let's take a second, and if anyone wants to tell a story on that, terrific. And if not, Greg, if you could offer one, that'd be terrific.
You know, but what comes to mind, Jeff, well, if anybody, I'll just jump in here. What comes to mind is I did a meeting once where we had 17 people in the meeting, kind of a large group, but that's the way they wanted it. So we had all the project managers, estimators, coordinators, customer service team, and the 3 people from the financial, office staff, bookkeepers. So 17 people, and got the whole thing done in an hour and a half. And the real kicker was that the team really wanted to end on a positive note. So the last 5 to 7 or 8 minutes was acknowledgments, because they wanted to end on a positive note. So, and how we did that was, everyone was very clear about what they were reporting, and there wasn't a lot of storytelling. We really minimized all the storytelling, and people got their reports done ahead of time. So and the funny thing about that is the joke around the office, we had a meeting every Thursday. So the joke around the office was, you wouldn't believe how much work got done on Wednesdays. I mean, it was funny, right? Because you get this natural thing where people, they know they're going to have an opportunity to give voice, to speak up and account for their work for the whole week. And so it was a driver, and it was like a winning formula. So
as Greg, as a whole, sorry to interrupt there, as a whole, talk to me about whether employees liked that structure or whether they disliked that structure. What, from your experience, how is that, the structure of delegation and the structure of accountability, how is that received in general?
That's a great question. Well, here's the thing. In a functional business culture, there's less apathy, resignation, laziness, and reasonableness. you know. And in dysfunctional business cultures, what you're really fighting against to have success, you know, what's impeding success is the apathy, resignation, reasonableness, and just laziness. So people say things like, you know, the dysfunctional attitude towards focusing on what needs to be done, participating in the meeting is, you know, you'll hear things like, oh, you know, when are we going to get done, you know, working on this or revising this or improving on this, you know, can we just like get there? And well, the answer is never, because as soon as what you need in a functional business environment is an environment of continuous learning. That successful businesses, one of the things you'll see in successful businesses is they embrace continuously learning, constant improvement. You got to keep looking to see, you know, how can you improve on things. Just because you don't want to shortchange yourself. Whatever you think of today and come up with today really won't be as brilliant as what you come up with next week or next month, if you just stay focused as a whole, as a team, as a culture. If you don't do that, the business plateaus. So now, really good employees embrace that. They want to work. You know, the kind of employees that you really like, rock star employees, really good employees, really actually appreciate that. They like that. They get empowered by that. So, you know, that begs the question, well, you know, what happens when you have employees who don't do that, right?
Certainly.
Yeah, so here's what happens. If you have a meeting environment that has really good transparency, in other words, you've got people, they're participating, you've got reporting happening, people are reporting on what's really important, and you've figured out really good drivers, then the problems then land right on the table, and the team's solving that as a team. When you have that kind of an environment, it's really obvious to everybody participating who's into it and who isn't. And then, you know, the team starts, this interesting thing starts happening. The team starts managing themselves. You know, they can see who's into it and who's not.
Well, and that's so true. And from my seat, business owners are not managers. It's not only managers, I'll say. And we've all heard the saying that you manage situations and you lead people. I don't know if that was Peter Drucker from the 80s or 90s. That probably goes way back. But as a business owner, we are a coach to a certain degree. And many times we don't view ourselves as that. But as a coach and as a mentor, we owe it to those below us to, number one, let them know how they're doing. You know, we owe them that. And we also need to afford them every opportunity to succeed. And so with those open lines of communication and maybe weekly or monthly, just quick sit-down sessions to find out how they're doing, what's on their mind, what can be improved, what's working, what's not working, what do you need help with. Those sessions build trust. I think it builds accountability and fosters those open lines of communication. But as owners, we cannot forget, we absolutely can't forget that we owe it to them to develop them into the team members that we need them to become. Because without that, it will forever be an owner-centric business model, and you're only going to be able to grow so much. And that's it's key that we get there mentally to understand that it's part of our responsibility is to develop them to our way of doing things in our culture.
You know, that's true, Jeff. When an owner invites employees to participate in his or her business, you inherit the responsibility to provide and take care of them. I think what today's conversation and discussion is really about is, well, you know, how do we do that? You know, what's the best way to do that? So I guess the point is if I would say regarding the whole issue of delegation, how you do that is get out of the way. There's if there was one solution, I would say, use the problems that are happening. I mean, here's the thing: we're in a challenging business. Restoration and construction, very challenging. There will always be an abundance of problems, breakdowns, So get out of the way. Use those to build leadership around you. So that can look like, this meeting structure that delivers problems right to the table. It might look like, if employees coming to you and going, well, what do you want me to do about this? And an owner needs to say, I don't know. You tell me. Bring me a solution, not just a problem.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Greg. In my experience, there's different levels of communication that we have with our staff based on their roles and responsibilities. And we call it situational leadership or situational conversations, because based on the scenario and the urgency and the need for a resolution, we approach that conversation differently. There's everything from, I'm going to decide, it's critical, we need the answer right now, so I'm just going to tell you what I need to be done. That's on one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, where it might not be that critical, is you decide. There isn't a bad answer here. As an owner, I don't care what you decide. Just fix it. Any solution you come up with is going to be great. And in the middle of that spectrum is, let's talk. Let's sit down and talk this through, and let's decide together. And there's varying degrees of communication in that spectrum. It might be a let's talk. I want your thoughts and opinions, but at the end of the day, the decision's mine. It's critical enough that as an owner, I need to make it. But I want your input and feedback. And on the other side of the spectrum, maybe we're going to sit down and talk, and I might give you a suggestion or two, but then you decide. I'm going to help you out with it, but at the end of the day, it's your decision. And so when we think about employees and what they're capable of, and then the consequence of their actions, we can sort of approach it with this I decide versus you decide, and this spectrum of communication and decision making in the middle. And too many owners are just in the I decide camp, and then maybe the let's talk and I'm going to decide anyway, because they just don't think that the employees are going to have that good of input. And Greg, to your point, it's vital that we trust those employees a little bit, and we've hired them for a reason. Let them be accountable and let them have some good input, because many times as frontline people, as the people out in the field talking to our customers, they know the situation maybe better than we do. We might know the policies and procedures, and we have that desired outcome in our head, but let's rely on them for some of that decision making that gives them ownership and leads to their ultimately a better satisfaction.
Yeah, it's it's tough for employers because they have all the responsibility. They have the responsibility for all the contracts to the customers, their overhead, payroll. So there's a lot at stake, and it's challenging for owners to let go. And so that's why it's probably important. It's probably really important to start as soon as possible and begin to set up an environment in the business where employees have the opportunity to be more accountable and solve those problems, so that they know. Here's a funny thing. What happens when employees know that they're going to be in a weekly meeting where they're going to be solving their own problems? Guess what happens?
They solve them.
They do, and they stop making the same problems over and over.
Oh, agreed.
Things start moving because they have figured out, they've seen it coming. They're now set up. There's actually a structure in place where they know that and have figured out that there's going to be an accountability the buck is stopping here. They know that they're going to be the one to answer for certain things. They feel the impact of it. So, and they actually get a lot of job satisfaction out of doing that. I mean,
Agreed.
They actually get to feel like they're making a difference.
Absolutely. And we all know that we have many, many different types of employees. There's a broad spectrum. And in the upcoming slides, Greg, you've done a nice job of identifying the sort of 4 major categories of personalities out there. And, I call it the ality of our human relations. We've all got the person that we're dealing with, but it's the ality. It's their perspective, their baggage, their opinions, their background. That's what we have to navigate, is the ality portion of the personality. And depending on who we're talking with, why, and their personality is going to dictate some of these decisions. But for the sake of time, let's just say that we're going to make these slides available to the attendees, and you can read about those different types of individuals that we try to navigate those conversations. But Greg, you've alluded to a business assessment that you do for business owners in the restoration space. What does that entail, and what does that look like for the owners that are listening?
Jeff, what I'm offering to anybody who intended to attend this or is attending is a 1 to 2 hour business assessment. So we can go through the business and talk about whatever their biggest challenges are. And I'll offer some best practice solutions for those things. In the course of doing that, we can look at it from the present time, what's happening in the business now, and also use that time to start putting some strategy together, some planning for 2017. So that's really what I'm offering. We can actually get a lot of work done in 1 or 2 hours. I'm offering it to anybody attending and listening who intended to be a part of this today for no cost. And that's it.
So if I were a business owner listening and I were sort of struggling with this, I knew I could be doing better. If I were to take this, if I were to sign up for the 1 to 2 hour assessment, I'm going to walk away with a little bit of a roadmap on what's ahead and how to get started. And if I were to ask the question, Greg, as an owner, when do I start to see the effects of this, the results of a plan that we go down the road with? Are those plans, the effect of those plans and results, will I see them in a few weeks, a few months? What is it that I can expect? I'll start to see the benefits depending on my team, about how far into the future.
Well, that's going to depend on the size of the business, how many employees. Businesses are more like snowflakes, so they're not exactly similar. There's some similarities, but they're not identical. So, I would say in terms of an assessment, planning, strategy, that's something that you're going to see the result of immediately. Then the execution, I think if I understand your question, the actual execution of that, if you do the things that I'm talking about doing, if we're practicing delegation, you can see the results of that immediately.
Yes.
Right? Like one meeting. Case in point, I was working with a company recently, and they've been in business for over 20 years. And we're meeting with the employees, and we had just finished a discussion of what they're accountable for. And we were discussing, what did success look like? So we're, for example, talking with the estimators and the general managers in the meeting, and the estimators are in the meeting, and we're asking them, so, what's your goal? What does successful estimating look like? How much, what do you want to do? And they looked at each other and said, well, we want to sell as much as possible. And, we asked them, how much is that? And they weren't really sure.
Okay.
It's humorous. And the general manager's listening to this going, oh my Lord, everybody thinks they're doing a good job. But the bottom line is, what these people were doing was they were doing what they thought was the best they could. And there was no actual declared clear outcome. So this was like this was an enlightening experience for the general manager to see how they actually hadn't set up a direction. People were, in fact, just working as fast as they can, doing as much as they could, with no clear, visible pathway and outcome. Okay, well, when we finished that conversation, people were very clear when the senior estimator said, "Oh, well, what I really want to do is I want to sell $3 million a year." Okay, let me tell you something. There is a huge difference in people's performance when they move from selling as much as they can to a clearly identified $3 million a year, or whatever. I think that's like something like $300,000 a month. Check my math, but
yep.
It's
pretty close.
Yeah, so very, and then at any point in time, at any point in the month, you can clearly see, exactly where you stand in relation to that, monthly goal. Huge difference in people's performance. Huge.
I believe it. Well, Greg, let me ask you a final question before we get to a few questions and answers here. We'll save a few minutes for that. You brought up a good point. You started this answer by saying if owners were to follow sort of some of the direction, what are some of the reasons owners don't? When you meet with a business owner and you say, here's the path that you should be on, here's what it means to be accountable and to successfully delegate, what are some of the experiences you've had or reasons you've heard where owners don't do that? What are some of the hurdles that they face?
Okay, that's a good question. So one thing they face is what we're dealing with is just a lifetime of habit, and they're blind spots.
Yes.
Sometimes, owners, thinking of one guy who was actually very concerned about his business to the point where he was writing to-do lists for each of he had 30 employees. He was writing a to-do list for his key employees every single day.
Wow.
Yeah, great guy, really a very good man. It's just that's what he was doing, and that's what he thought he had to do. So sometimes it's born of their personality. Sometimes we just briefly looked at some of those slides on personality. Sometimes there's a particular personality that gravitates towards the construction industry, that likes to be in charge, and so sometimes their inability to just build leadership, delegate, let things go around them, to let employees step up is born of a particular personality type.
Yeah. I think from my experience, and Michael Gerber touches on this in the E-Myth Revisited about why businesses fail and what to do about it, but it's the technician in us that makes us good at what we do. So when we bought that first van and we cleaned those first carpets, or we successfully finished that first job, we understood we were great technicians, and we built a business, 4, 5, 6 people around us just being a good technician. But as businesses grow, we as owners have to be able to take that technician hat off and put on a manager's hat or a leader's hat, and shift our focus from being a good technician to being a good leader. And that is the struggle from my seat that a lot of business owners face, that they're stuck in this technician mode, but they've got 15, 18, 20 employees, and they're working so hard, and their work-life balance is so out of whack that they call me out of frustration and say, I just need this gone. My marriage is on the rocks. I don't know my kids. You got to get me out of here. And my first response is always, if we could get you down to 40, 50 hours a week, and you are making as much money or more than you are, would you sell? And they say, well, I don't think so, but I just don't see that happening. They can't even see that path. And it's literally the ability to shift into a leadership role and becoming strategic with your mindset not feeling like you have to be the technician for everything that happens in your business. And so if you haven't read that book, it's a great read. It talks about systems and procedures, etc. And Greg, that's where you can really help. And that's why I like your style when you say every business is a snowflake. And it is. The personalities are different, the situations are different, and sometimes it takes that one-on-one approach.
You know, Jeff, that's it. Thank you for the acknowledgement. It reminds me of a particular business owner. You know, the thing that owners can do is ask for help. I know that's not that easy to do, but they can ask for help. And if they can, be open to receiving some coaching, here's the thing, they have no idea how good it could be. I'm reminded of one of the people on my website, a guy who had been in business for many years, and I went to work for him, and we built a team, and the team stepped up, and really everything was going really well and very successful. And then a few months down the road, the owner had the opportunity to go actually take on a new project, another thing that he really wanted to do. So we went to the team and we said, look, we really need you guys to take care of the business like all week long, and the owner's only going to be here one day a week. Well, let me just ask you, how do you think the team responded to that?
Yeah, probably with a slight pucker factor initially.
They were thrilled.
Yeah.
They were like, yeah, we got this. And that's the counterintuitiveness, is that owners think, well, you're going to have to pay them more money for that, or you're going to have to, no, actually, really, that's almost never the case. If you have good employees, they love having the freedom to have their own autonomy. Basically, you're giving them the safety and security of a steady paycheck with all the thrill, adventure, challenge, and support. You got to, give them some support. You got to, you still got to, give them some support. But that was a winning formula. So that owner took on that project for a number of years, and basically, he had two incomes. His project produced an income, and his business produced an income. It was a very successful engagement. The team loved it, and by the way, we're talking a restoration company. So this is a company where the owner was there one day a week, and the team took care of things came in on a Friday night, if there are some notes that had to be put into the system over the weekend, they did that. They were phenomenal. And, so the possibility for the upside on this is really huge. I continue to be amazed and surprised at what employees really love to do. I'm tempted to share another story. There's I'm always inspired by stories of best practices. And there's another coordinator I've seen. The coordinator position in the restoration industry is a phenomenal position. It really requires somebody to be on top of quite a few things. I'm thinking of a company where there's on the East Coast, there's a coordinator, and her name's Amy. And the thing that everyone says to the project managers and the estimators is that, and she works like a tornado. She's just like an incredibly upbeat, positive, great person. And the thing that they say to the people on the rest of the team is, you can't keep up with Amy, you can't work here. So that's an example of a really great team, a very fun environment.
Excellent. Well, Greg, we've got 6-7 minutes here left, and maybe we'll just open it up for a few questions. I'm betting there's a few that have come in or might come in here shortly. And I'm probably going to be on your screen at this point. But does anyone have any questions for Greg or I before we wrap it up?
Jeff, I'm seeing some questions here.
Terrific. And we can't see those. What if you want to state the question, Greg, and then just sort of answer those for us? That'd be terrific.
Okay, so first, one of the questions is how do they sign up for an assessment? Let me just go to there's well, just send me an email, give me a call, 415-699-8512, or send me an email, greg@greggreneelassociates.com. There's my contact.
And Greg, is that something, just for personal clarification, is that something that's done over the phone? Is it online? Is there a worksheet to fill out? How do you sort of walk somebody through that?
Good question, Jeff. It's done over the phone, and since businesses are rather unique, we'll just start with figuring out exactly what they need. We'll start with a conversation, and that's all really, that's what we'll do. So,
okay. Are there any other questions?
Let me look. So, do I get into leadership techniques and communication styles as well? Yes, I do. When I look at the personality diagnostics side of things, what's really interesting about that is that, and what got me into that is that I have been offering pretty much the same curriculum to many, many, many companies for the last 20 years. And what I couldn't figure out is the question that really, I began to ask is, how come I'm offering a very similar curriculum to different companies, but they have such completely different responses to it? Well, so that got me into, we're dealing with human beings, and they're not all the same. So yeah, there are different communication styles and leadership techniques that I have learned to be responsible for and speak to.
And just an add-on to that, that was a great question. An add-on would be, do you do any DISC assessments or 360s or personality evaluations to help people communicate better, or is that sort of outside your strike zone, Greg?
No, I use a system. I do
Okay.
assessment. Yes, I do. And I have a particular system for personality diagnostics that I use called the Enneagram. And it's a very easy, simple thing. And you saw a little bit of it in the slides that we just, kind of glanced at. Well, Jeff, I think we have time for one more question here. And
okay.
it's that, somebody has tried to change their culture in the company for years and obviously feels that it was not successful. So, so for that person, I guess my question back to you is, I would have to find out more about, what were you doing to change the culture? I mean, you're on the right track. It's really the culture of the business that's impacting people's behavior. That's the right place to focus your attention. So what were you doing? That's what I would want to know. I just, I invite whoever that is to have a conversation with me. Let's go a little deeper. Let's find out, what were you doing? What, what did you start with? What do you have now? Because there are, the bottom line is there are things that we can do. When we actually look at what defines the business culture, what we see is it's the practices, the systems, the procedures. So if you've attempted to change the culture, I would say there's probably something that's persisting, that, like an old habit or some kind of old pattern that keeps producing the same result. A way to think about this is, a business is designed a certain way. However it's designed is producing the results you get. You want a different result? You got to redesign specifically the business culture.
Yeah, that's well said. And I know from my experience, culture is sort of a slippery subject because people often view the results and the symptoms of a culture and what it produces. But it's tough to pinpoint, what drives a culture because it's so internal to many of the our staff and our employees that we can interpret things so many different ways. So it takes a long time to create, at least I think it does. That's sort of your strike zone, Greg. But it's such a great question because it's tough to put your finger on, but what we as owners think about culture many times is what we see as a result of the culture. If it's a bad behavior or a lack of communication or systems and procedures that aren't succeeding the way we want them to, that it ties into culture, but I view that as a result of the culture that exists. And so, Greg, I think you're spot on that if we want the different results, we've got to change behind the scenes and what everyone's expectations and communication style is to help ensure success.
Yes.
Well, everyone, I've got just a couple of minutes left. I'm going to have to step off. But I'm out of questions, Greg. If you have anything to wrap up, that'd be terrific. Or if there's any last minute questions that have come in.
No, that's it, Jeff. Thank you so much for hosting me today. Thank you, everyone, for who joined us today. And that's it. We're done. We're good. And should anybody want to take advantage of my offer, please call me or email me.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Greg.
Thank you.